It is the 16th century. From all over Europe, great ships sail west to conquer the New World, the Americas. The men eager to seek their fortune, to find new adventures and new lands. They long to cross uncharted seas and discover unknown countries, to find secret gold on a mountain trail high in the Andes. They dream of following the path, the setting sun which leads to Eldorado and the mysterious cities of gold.
Etc. Hello! Yes, we're doing ELO. Yeah, ELO is an interesting one. There's kind of two questions that need to be answered, I think, for us. Two questions. Question number one is about, I think they had a bit of an image problem in the 70s. I think they were pretty uncool. And you know, the question is about us reviewing it. Should we? Is it part of what we do or not? And why they have that image problem? Why are they considered uncool? Now, actually, I can see a lot of parallels with Genesis. There's not many musical parallels, there's not really any at all, but there's a lot of parallels with Genesis in that they're seen as selling out, and obviously they were hugely successful, which is possibly part of it. But also that there wasn't a sudden evil moment. It was a gradual change, although they certainly have an album of Evil Moment. And there's a second one after that, which we're not even going to talk about because it's just evil what they did after that. It's just sacrilege. So no. So they did go disco at the end of the 70s, but it was a gradual change. So I think that's interesting. The second thing is more of a personal thing in that I don't actually own any ELO albums. It belongs to my parents, and I grew up listening to ELO. Interestingly, I think from about age 7 or 8 onwards, and before then I hadn't heard them at all. And the question is about, did that inform my taste in music? And the answer is, obviously, actually. And it'll become even more obvious in the next two albums we do, actually. So yeah, it is definitely the same style of stuff that we normally do. Doesn't mean it's the same as all the other bands, but then all these bands are quite different, aren't they? So, you know, it's definitely part of the same oeuvre, I think. Oeuvre.
I've been brutally honest, I've never really come across ELO. I've never really had the desiring burn to seek them out.
Yeah, and I bet a lot of people are like that. I've heard the name.
Yeah, I mean, you have that very iconic album cover. That seems to be it, really. I mean, it's sort of
everyone knows that they have a logo, don't they?
Very peculiar. So, I mean, I was quite interested when we said we were going to do ELO to see actually what they actually sounded like.
Yeah, and it's on the one hand kind of predictably obvious what they were going to sound like. I don't want to talk about the Wolverines today. We'll save that for later on. But some of it does sound like the Traveling Wolverines, which is quite funny, obviously. But yeah, so Electric Light Orchestra, they're formed out of the death of the Move. So they kind of are the Move, really. They're just the renamed Move, where the aim was to carry on where the Beatles left off. That sounds awful, doesn't it? I mean, the other bands that have said that, I remember in the 90s, all those awful 90s bands, but I remember a band called the Boo Radleys. Do you remember the Boo Radleys?
Vaguely.
The singer was bald, that's right, and they had coats on. That's it was around the time when you started to hear these bands live. Things started getting transmitted live, and traditionally those sort of bands would mime. To hear them live, you have to go and see them. They were awful. And it wasn't their songs, I didn't care about their songs, maybe they were right, I don't know, but they were just terrible as a band. It was awful. So nothing at all like this stuff. But I think there is something in that they are kind of Sgt. Pepper the band. I think that's kind of interesting. I'm not a massive fan of Sgt. Pepper, but it's not the concept, it's not the sound of it. I love the sound of it and the concept. I just think, I don't particularly like the songs in the middle. I think it sags a bit with Sgt. Pepper. And it's a good album, obviously, but it's just massively overrated. So I have no problem with them doing that at all. The other thing is the orchestra bit. It's a band with an orchestra. They're doing an orchestra.
Clues in the title.
He's not getting out. He's trying to get out. He's not getting out. He doesn't know how you look around. You're not getting out. You know, I mean, we did the Moody Blues. Yeah. And remember, I mean, you suggested, didn't you? Well, you suggested 3 bands actually. There was ELO, which came out as Elongated on the message. So, a band called Elongated. So at some point we might make a piece of music called Elongated. Moody Blues and Boyzone. So I pointed out, well, obviously which band we're going to do. It's going to be Boyzone, isn't it? But in my mind, I thought, yeah, we need to do the Moodies first, because there's got to be a bit of a similarity there. It's not at all.
No.
I didn't realise how Americanised the Moody's were, actually. But obviously the first album did have an orchestra on. So on the one hand you've got a band sort of just songwriters strumming guitars, sellotaping random bits of orchestra in between songs. On the other hand you've got the nice and Deep Purple writing concertos, and where it's classical music with a band playing on it, which is a different thing, whether you think it's good or bad. I think actually genuinely ELO are really good at meeting in the middle. It's definitely rock music, it's definitely songs, it's definitely orchestral music as well.
Yeah.
It's both, and it all fits together.
You actually get the sense that a lot of prog bands, that's the kind of thing they were trying to achieve.
Yeah, and very rarely is it achieved in the middle like that. So that's a real thing, I think.
My sort of impression of them, listening to them, I thought Pink Floyd actually. I thought there's a similar sensibility there, but they've got a much broader musical palette, but they don't go as deep. So on the best Pink Floyd albums, obviously they go real deep. Whereas ELO, Wild God Sensor, is very...
Songs.
Yeah.
It's songs. It's just songs. In the end, actually, that's all that matters, it's just songs. It's funny you say that, and I've listened to the 3 albums we're going to review, actually. It says a lot, actually. I've been listening to all 3 over the whole Christmas period. I've had a CDR of all 3 albums, and another song I've ripped from YouTube, one song from YouTube, not going to say what that is, in the car, and it's been going back in, and it's going back in. I've been listening to them a lot. And I've been thinking about what does this sound like, what band does this sound like other than the Beatles. And actually, one of the interesting ones was Queen. I'm not going to talk about that today because I don't think it's this album, but later on it becomes more apparent. I thought I'd put it in there because it'd be controversial really, but you know. Yeah, you do find, you're thinking about what band does this sound like? And whilst, Mr. Kingdom on this particular album particularly is actually a Beatles melody. It's actually Across the Universe. It goes That's just the first bit, but I don't know, you figured out legally how many notes. But I think that's one of the filler tracks on the album actually. And what I think seems unique to me is a real Dylan thing in there. That's only on this album, I think. There's much more. There's a folkiness and maybe the approach to the vocals as well. I hear that's Bob, not Thomas, on this album. Did you hear that?
Yeah, I was actually quite surprised by the vocals. I was expecting to hear something identifiable, and it wasn't, which I found quite peculiar, seeing as we'd heard a little bit of what's his face on the Travelling Wilburys. Is his name?
Bob Dylan. Is that what you mean? Oh, do you mean Jeff Lynne?
Jeff Lynne, yeah, Jeff Lynne. Yeah, and then I was suddenly realised, well, this is not identifiable at all, and he's quite nondescript actually. I was quite, not unimpressed, but the vocals didn't draw my attention at all. Maybe the lyrics slightly more, but it was more about the instrumentation for me, because obviously there's the orchestration side of things going, which I think automatically grabs my attention anyway.
What I've been trying to do, maybe I wondered if it wasn't possible, but I've really enjoyed listening to it, so I think I've succeeded, is that I know it all. I've heard this has been on in the house at home as a child, in the air, and I know all the sounds of it, like Led Zeppelin 4, how you just know the sound of all of it.
But is that sort of like a feeling of nostalgia, or is it actually appreciating the music?
I don't think so.
I personally did not enjoy it. I thought it was perfectly good music. And actually, if I'd sort of discovered this when I was maybe 14, 15, I probably would have really got into it. I would have taken the time to listen to it quite a lot and explore the catalogue. Yeah,
because you say about the vocals, I struggle to say anything about the vocals. It just sounds like Jeff Lynne. So I don't know what. I know that's what the album sounds like. Yeah. But you've got the overture, obviously, which is the orchestra I'm talking about now. Can't get it out of my head. That there is the Jeff Lynne thing, and that there could be a Wilburys song, or it could be a solo album by various people. But I think that's something to define there, and I'm not that au fait with the previous 3 albums, but I get the impression that it's something to define there, and a lot of that is production. Because remember, he's a producer. Mm-hmm. He's as famous as being a producer as he is famous as being a songwriter. So, he was offered a lot of things that he turned down. I mean, he did the Beatles, obviously, but I mean, he was offered Use Your Illusion. Guns N' Roses tried to get him for Use Your Illusion. Well, initially that seems bizarre, but you think about it, you know, Axl Rose was going for this timeless, like a 70s album. He wanted to do his Physical Graffiti, so he wanted someone to smoothen over the edges and make it all luscious and which is interesting, but he turned it down, he didn't want to do it. And I think that production, at least, is defined on that track, possibly the songwriting as well. Conversely, the next song, Boy Blue, I don't know whether it's a deliberate sound, but it's a noisy, and there's very shouty vocals, and I don't know if it's meant to sound like that, in that it's supposed to be kind of a big party soundy, something quite Bob Dylan-y, but you know, later Jeff Lynne would have produced that better. Whether it's vocal technique, production, arranging, I don't know, and there's a lot going on. There's strings, there's the violin player in the band, as well as the strings, and you know, so there's a lot going on there.
I mean, it's interesting we're talking about production here, because obviously Jeff Lynne is a big producer name. There's different approaches to music, and obviously you talked about Genesis earlier. They had sort of like a burning desire to be, well, I think they had a burning desire to be famous and to be seen as as very accomplished musicians.
Yeah.
All the things that you associate with prog. You do get the sense from this there's a sort of a little bit of playing going on, playing with sounds which you would expect from a producer.
Yes.
Which is probably what drags it away from, which is why we struggle to sort of put it in our Venn diagram, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
You know,
yeah.
Is this part of
producer-songwriter thing, which is a different thing.
Yeah.
Not a music. There's a really interesting quote, really recent, I think it's actually 2015, when he had to do interviews for the release of the album, when he did those mini shows before the big tour. And he said about, back in the old days, it was all guitar solos. It was just 20-minute guitar solos. And he said, well, I couldn't really do that, so maybe I'll find my own way. I found that was the spark of me thinking about how to review this, really. I thought that was interesting. I don't think, on the one hand, I think he was being a bit revisionist, in that that's kind of what people would expect him to say. And I think really, it's not true. And really what he was doing was much the same as what everyone else was doing, really. And he said, well, maybe I'm not a good enough guitar player to do that kind of thing. But he is. Actually, he's a really good guitarist. You don't hear it that much, but what you do hear, actually, he's a really good guitarist. And a lot of people were interested in the production. I mean, Mike Oldfield is kind of like that as well, isn't he? It's all about the production. Probably more so. It's interesting saying that about Boy Blue, I'm not sure maybe there's an awful lot going on. There's moments of cacophony where it's just so much playing. Obviously he's trying to get everything in there. And the vocals, I'm not sure about the vocals, the delivery, the production, whatever it is. Whereas, I mean, Eldorado is fantastic. It's easy to not realise he's a really good singer, actually. I don't know about the timbre of his voice is not necessarily fantastic, but he can sing all this stuff, you know, and here he's doing his Roy Orbison impression, really, that's what it is. You know, don't forget at the concert for George, on the Travelling Wilburys song, he sung Roy Orbison's part. Obviously, we rate Roy Orbison.
I mean, what is the album about? I mean, what is this? I get the sense it's another ELO album.
That's interesting, yeah.
Yeah, it's not sort of like, okay, what are we going to do now? It's sort of, he's got his producer hat on. I mean, obviously, it's so dependent on him. Everything's him, lyrics, music, arrangement, production, he's so involved with it. I mean, maybe it's losing that little bit of definition that you get with
a band.
With a band, yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely not a band at this point. It's definitely the auteur thing. Interesting. I mean, you have to remember the first album was with Roy Wood. It was much more esoteric, and Roy Wood was actually going for the much more esoteric stuff. The Battle of something Bodwin Moor or something is all strings, as in Roy Wood plays it all on cello and all this stuff. I think it's fantastic. Apparently, Jeff Lynne and Bev Bevan, not anyone cared about things, thought it was rubbish. So that's interesting. And I believe Roy Wood did stay till the start of the second album, so the start of making the second album, he was still then left at that point because they were just loggerheads. But the second album started to chart a bit. With the third album, I get the impression it's a much more commercial album, and maybe with this one they went back a bit to doing a big orchestral concept album. And actually, the third album didn't chart, or maybe scraped the top of the charts or something. It didn't do very well, strangely. And this one is the one where they broke through. You have to remember they became ludicrously successful later on, and this was the start of that ascent, actually, where they were being lightly proggy.
Yeah, which is peculiar because you say you're right, very lightly proggy, because there's always something challenging about a good prog album.
Yes.
And it's either crazy arrangements,
Or try not to listen to the lyrics.
yeah, that kind of thing, or it's a very, very dark themes, as in sort of Dark Side of the Moon, which is more on why that is a prog album, although
It's very, very commercial.
yeah, musically there is nothing challenging there, it just sounds fantastic.
Yeah.
But it goes into sort of incredibly dark places, incredibly introspective. This just feels happy, well, yeah, it just feels...
It's just songwriting.
It's just songs, yeah, it's just sort of...
And maybe in the end he realised that's what he's good at, and that's what he...
Yeah, I mean that is a producer, again, that feels like a producer role. How can we maximise the appeal of this album rather than what's the most interesting thing we can do with this album? That's the sort of... It always feels like the conflict between the band and the production company with prog. It doesn't feel like that conflict's there at all.
No.
I would imagine the label would be quite happy for Jeff Lynne to go away and do whatever he wants, because they know what they'll get back will be maximised in terms of appeal.
Yeah, I don't know whether at this point whether they were involved with Don Arden and Jet Records or not. Don't know. Let us know if it is. But I thought that's another interesting thing that they were produced. They were managed by Don Arden. It says Epic. I don't know what Epic Records is. I can't remember. We'll probably talk about that next week. So yeah, a good album. I find it very difficult to egg it because it's a really good album. It's not 6 eggs. It's not like and yet 5 eggs seems over the top. I'd like to give it 4.5 eggs because it's very successful at what it does and it's really good. It seems harsh to give it 4 eggs, but it probably doesn't do enough for me to give it 5 eggs.
Yeah, I think with a 4 egg album, you either want to have to listen to it again or explore more, you're intrigued, or it's done something particularly unique. And I don't think it doesn't feel that way to me, although at the time it may have been quite unique. Obviously we're looking at this through history. I mean I'd give it 3 eggs. But Hedge It, I'll probably, if I listen to it a few more times, it may go up to a 4 egg album.
Yeah, I mean obviously it stood the test of time.
Yeah.
In that I already know it and wanted to listen to it.
Yeah. I mean we're also coming off the back of we did the Moody Blues and we did
Tall before that, wasn't it?
Yeah, and both of those were very pleasantly surprising to me. So the fact that we're presented by something that's not quite up there is probably tainting my judgment a little bit.
Yeah, and yet I'm surprised. I think this is much better than the Moody's, actually, and that surprised me. I thought maybe that ELO will turn out to be a derivative of the Moody's, and that's not true at all. That's enough. We've reviewed it now, haven't we?
Yeah.
So that'll do.
Yeah. So
see you next week for that one. Face the Music.
Yeah. Hopefully we'll be a bit more.
A bit more.
Yeah. Happy New Year, everyone. By the way.
Happy New Year! See you next week.